I want to congratulate you and We the World on the 20th anniversary of 11 days of global unity. Together, you, me, and we can create a better world and have fun doing it.
Welcome to the 11 Days of Global Unity Summit, celebrating the 20th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity. My name is Jana Larsen, and I am the Human Resources Director and the coordinator of the Economic Justice Campaign of We the World, as well as many other things for We the World. Today, I'm excited that we will be joined by Michael Wayne and Dr. Marty K. Casey, who will be talking about freedom. For the full 11-day schedule, you can register for free by going to we.net, and you can see replays of the recordings. You can also make a contribution to support We the World by going to we.net. Thank you. Now let's bring in my co-host, Rick Ulfik. Rick Ulfik is the founder of We the World at we.net and the co-creator of 11 Days of Global Unity. Welcome to the broadcast, Rick Ulfik.
Thank you, Jana. And thank you all so much for joining us. I and we are deeply grateful that you are helping us to celebrate the 20th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity. As Jana said, my name is Rick Ulfik, and I'm the founder of We the World at we.net. Before we bring on our extraordinary speakers, I want to acknowledge some of our amazing partners who we support and collaborate with during 11 Days of Global Unity and all year round. The UN International Day of Peace NGO Committee, the UN Summit of the Future, Unite for Peace, Peace Week, Climate Week, the Deep and Rapid Transformation Convergence, Pause the World in Times Square, the Unity Earth Japan Convergence, the Sign Network, One World, and Pace a Bene Nonviolence Campaign and March, all working with We the World and the We campaign at we.net. What an amazing movement representing literally millions of people working to achieve global unity. On today's panel, we are discussing freedom, and we will start with Dr. Marty K. Casey, who has a poem to share.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Rick, it is an honor and a pleasure to be here always. Thank you so much for the invite. When you asked me to come to speak today about freedom, I couldn't help but think about my great grandmother who was born in 1910. And she was a fabulous entertainer, a singer, and an actress herself. And I believe that's where I get these things from. But her favorite poet was Langston Hughes. And I remember her sharing this piece with me when I was a little girl. And so I wanted to share that today. And it is entitled Freedom. Freedom will not come today, this year, nor ever through compromise and fear. I have so much right as the other fellow has to stand on my 2 feet and on the land. I tire so of hearing people say, let things take their course. Tomorrow is another day. I do not need my freedom when I'm dead. I cannot live on tomorrow's bread. Freedom is a strong seed planted in a great need. I live here too. I want my freedom just as you.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Marty. All right, so as we start our panel, I wanted to do kind of an overview, how I see the situation with freedom. We are seeing a disturbing trend of authoritarian regimes around the world exchanging resources and support. And unfortunately, they also have a growing synergy with some in the United States. For now, let's focus on the US with the theme Facing the Crisis of Democracy in the USA. There are some major concerns that I have, and I also want to mention some sources of hope that we can discuss as well. To start, think about how big money special interests are funding politicians and even helping judges to get appointed, who are rolling back the rights of women, LGBTQ people, teachers, educators, immigrants, and even children living in poverty. And consider that we have major social media platforms specifically that have a huge profit motive to spread misinformation and disinformation, lies that fuel extreme political polarization and generate support for politicians that promote the idea that some people and groups are different and dangerous. On the other hand, how about if we find solutions to address our us versus them culture of intolerance that is keeping people from coming together to solve the problems we are all facing? How can we raise awareness about the fact that large majorities of people are actually not polarized regarding many political issues? People generally agree that they want big money out of politics. People want women to have the freedom to make their own health choices about their own bodies. They want to expand voting rights. And people want to see universal background checks for gun purchases as well. The problem is not finding agreement between people. Rather, the problem is turning majority interests into majority rule that serves the common good, instead of minority rule that only serves the big money special interests. How about let's expand we power, the power of people to come together to transform our society and our world? Could our democracy itself become an embodiment of we consciousness that works for the common good? Can you imagine that? So let's hear from our first guest. Michael Wayne, PhD, LAC, is an author of 5 books, filmmaker, and co-host and producer of the series Voices for the Future. And he currently is producing a documentary feature film called How to Save democracy, and he's a member of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle. Welcome to the broadcast, Michael Wayne.
Well,
Yes, it's great to see you, and thank you. So, Michael, given what I said when I was on my soapbox just now, including my hopeful slant about expanding people power, what is your assessment regarding the state of democracy in the USA? And with your crucial documentary, How to Save Democracy, what do you think it will take to create a society that works for all?
well, thank you, Rick. Thank you, Marty, Dr. Casey, Jana. And I'll be happy to address that. And in speaking, I want to trace some history, kind of give an overview, a survey, starting at the founding of the US, and then skip ahead to discuss from the 1930s to our current time to look at where we find ourselves and the state of democracy. And I want to do this to say, it's what you're getting at, Rick. We consciousness, the common good, has been done before in this country, and it was just we've gotten off the, fallen off the train. So first, I want to point out that in saying that the U.S. is a democracy, there's a difference in the democracy that we in the United States have and most other democracies have. The difference is that the US is a liberal democracy, while most other democracies are social democracies. So what that means is that the US, as a liberal democracy, is rooted in freedom, just like you talk about, Rick, the theme of our conversation. So it's rooted in this kind of offbeat or aberrant form of freedom and liberty for the individual, and also free markets for the business corporate sector, and for both individuals and corporations. Government regulations should be lessened, though of course in things like choice, abortion, then the right wing wants to have government regulation. But anyway, and so also, for instance, with this aberrant form of liberty, freedom, you have Second Amendment people feel guns are a right, and that's part of freedom. And from this economic sector, letting businesses have free rein to decide what's best for themselves and pay as little taxes as possible. So it leads to things like a healthcare system, a free market healthcare system where people can go broke trying to pay their medical bills, or a free market education system where students can go into crushing debt to go to college, a free market housing system where there's no control on, and so for renters, purchasers, the prices are just over the top and leads to a certain level of homelessness in this country. And it's an approach that's all about I and me, an opposite of we. And this way is crushing the soul of democracy in the US. And meanwhile, a social democracy that I said is most other democracies is more about the we. It's what's best for the common good. There's more government regulation, a strong social safety net. So there's such things as universal health care, free college, subsidized child care, generous sick and paternity leave, and so on. So what happened? How did the U.S. get this way? So this is where I want to trace back to the founding of this the United States. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the immortal words in the Declaration of Independence, these words were, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." It was a radical step forward in the creation of democracy. Obviously, there are major flaws in this statement, in that it was white men, mostly slave owners, writing this, and so the all men created equal phrase omitted slaves and women. But it was still a radical statement that was rooted in the Enlightenment philosophers and also the ideas of Aristotle, both who believed that freedom was predicated on human flourishing. And Aristotle also felt and he wrote this in many of his writings, that the flourishing of the individual was interconnected to the flourishing of the community and society as a whole. And he equated to living a fulfilled life, one aligned with our deepest values and aspirations. We're not just for ourselves, but interconnected with our entire community. And so 11 years later, 1787, when the United States Constitution was written, it borrowed heavily from the constitution of the oldest democracy on the planet, the Iroquois or Haudenosaunee Federation. But the Iroquois had something in their constitution that didn't make it into the United States Constitution, and that was that all decisions were made with the understanding of how it would impact future generations, and if it would impact future generations in a negative way, it wasn't the right decision to be made. The US went instead in a different direction, allowing for freedom and the pursuit of happiness, absent of thinking about the greater good. And so going forward, it took two major calamities in the United States to change its moral compass to this pursuit of happiness without thinking of the greater good. The Civil War was the first one, which ended slavery and led to the Reconstruction Amendments, which finally opened the door to the potential of the true ideals of America, although the door was quickly shut with the beginning of the Jim Crow era, and still women didn't have the right to vote. And then 70 years later, the Great Depression, when Wall Street crashed the economy. And the Great Depression actually was the impetus for ushering in a wave of democracy in the US that had never been seen before anywhere in the world. It was the era of we consciousness in which the common good and social cohesion was foremost. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president, brought forth the New Deal, in which a social safety net was created and the government made substantial investments in its citizenry, and the banks were regulated so they couldn't crash the economy again. FDR took to heart the saying by then Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who said, quote, "We can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both," end quote. So FDR restored democracy to the US, and his version of democracy was that of a social democracy. And this version of democracy in the US continued even after FDR's time in office. It continued till, in subsequent administrations, till 1980 with the presidency of Ronald Reagan. And part of that period of time was there was an evening of the playing field from an economic standpoint. Over those decades, the highest marginal tax rates were anywhere from 70% to 94%, which meant that there were very few mega rich people and virtually no billionaires, very different from today. And then Reagan ushered in a new era, and his successors continued on, one that undid the New Deal policies and set forth neoliberalism, which focused on re-regulation, letting corporations make as much money as possible. And it believed that freedom came when people didn't have government to help them and instead could make it on their own. The social safety net was drastically pared back, and with it, more and more people over these decades couldn't make ends meet. And Reagan slashed the income tax rates, which allowed money to flow to the top 1%. And with that, wealth inequality grew more extreme. And as people became wealthier, they expected to have a say in public policy. And this is now standard in right now in this time. Banks were deregulated and allowed it to do whatever they wanted, which led to the crashing of the global economy in 2008. So now we're at a point where we realize the bankruptcy of trickle-down economics. And again, the government is once again making major investments in its people. We saw two major investments during the current presidency of Joe Biden with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. And yet there's a countervailing force, Rick, you alluded to it, this minority created out of the 40 years of trickle-down economics that is trying its best to stop the possibilities for true democracy to occur in the US. This countervailing force falls under the umbrella term of the tyranny of the minority. Its trajectory is empowered by dark money forces and has led to such things as Citizen United, unlimited amount of money in the political realm, radical gerrymandering, so you get Congress people who are just really extreme, an evisceration of the Voting Rights Act, so states could set up roadblocks to people voting, and also the placement of extremist judges on the Supreme Court. And it's been aided by institutional impediments such as the Electoral College, the filibuster, and the poorly designed U.S. Senate, which misrepresents the U.S. population and favors sparsely populated states over densely populated states. But here's the thing. As I said, the U.S. was the world's first social democracy in the 1930s, thanks to the New Deal policies of FDR. And after World War II, when the United States helped rebuild Europe through the Marshall Plan and from the devastation that World War II incurred on Europe, it exported the ideas of social democracy and helped European countries become beacons of democracy that looked after the common good. And unfortunately, American democracy backslid from the 1980s on. Now the democracy index rates the United States as a flawed democracy. And so we lost the compass here in the United States of a we consciousness and the common good, while at the same time, European democracies have prospered even further using the ideas of we consciousness and the common good. But the United States doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just look at what we had during the New Deal era over those decades, and also look what the social democracies have and start building from there. And plus, the United States is unique among most of the other world democracies, except from what I've been told, Australia, in that it's on its way to becoming a true multiracial, multicultural democracy, which will allow for citizens with different perspectives to have a say. And then there's the youth demographic, the 18 to 34-year-old, that's highly skewed liberal to progressive by a margin of 2 to 1. They also want to see a just democracy, one that works for all and not just a few. And they are mobilized to vote and mobilized to take action in other ways if need be, protests, marches, strikes, civil disobedience, in order to create that more fair society. So I think we're well on the way. And I think many people are also feeling that right now. The excitement that is felt by the potential presidency of Kamala Harris is something that's generating a lot of hope. And it has the possibility of writing a new American story, one that finally allows in the United States for the true meaning of democracy to occur, one that allows for human flourishing and a society that works for all. But to get there, we still have to remain vigilant and be aware and remember the words of Louis Brandeis, who I said before, that we can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. So that's the gist of what I wanted to say. And I feel very hopeful for the future of democracy in the United States. And it's really remembering, as I said, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to harken back to a time that we had when the common good was first and foremost. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And before you go, I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit about your upcoming documentary. I know it's kind of going to be a preview at this point, but do you want to say anything about it? And then people
thank you.
could be looking out for it.
Yeah. So it's, as you mentioned, it's called How to Save Democracy, and I thought I was done with production, but then someone I had reached out to back in April, just out of the blue, contacted me a week ago. So we're going to talk beginning of September virtually. All interviews. I've done 15 interviews, and only 2 are virtual, or live. You were one of the interview subjects too, Rick. Thank you. This woman, I was really interested in interviewing her. She's a writer, lives in Finland. She's a Finnish citizen and actually American citizen too. And I want to talk to her about, and she wrote a book called The Nordic Theory of Everything. And I want to talk to her about what democracy is like in the Nordic countries, in Finland, the social democracies, and how it differs from the United States. So it's, like just like I was talking about what the United States had in the 1930s, it's important for people to understand it's being done. There's countries that prosper all over the world, these democracies, and in the World Happiness Report findings, ratings, Finland is always rated #1 in world happiness. So anyway, I've interviewed quite a few people, as I said, 15, I'll be the 16th, on the subject of democracy, people with different backgrounds. Some have won Pulitzer Prize for their writing, whether investigative work or novelists, essayists, but all have something to say about democracy, and some from the political standpoint, some from and social justice, some from the economic standpoint. And really, what I also want to point to is the aspirational future. Like I talked about, the United States has potential in getting there of becoming a multicultural, multiracial democracy. And one of the persons I talked to, a woman by the name of Madiba Denny, who wrote a recent book on originalism. She's a lawyer herself. She pointed out, she made some good points about this movement towards a multiracial democracy. And she said the Reconstruction Amendments that I mentioned, the 13th through 15th Amendments, that really ended slavery, created true equality, even though not for women. That was the first Reconstruction. And then she said the 1960s, the Civil Rights era, was the second Reconstruction, when the Great Society, Lyndon Johnson signed into law with all the civil rights protests. He heard the calling and signed into law the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and then, as I mentioned, that part of the Voting Rights Act was eviscerated by the Supreme Court in 2013. And then what she said was, we are entering the period of the third Reconstruction, where we can reach that aspirational future and the true ideals of the American experiment of democracy. And we call it an experiment because democracy really wasn't, it was new. It had been done in the ancient society, ancient Greek and Athens. There was a period of time, and I mentioned the Iroquois, but otherwise there was not a lot for the American framers to go on. And they had some vision and did some things that were great and some things that weren't great. And I'll say one other thing. One of the people I interviewed was a constitutional scholar who talked about that Thomas Jefferson himself felt that the Constitution should be rewritten every generation. Back then a generation was 19 years, so it's a little longer now. But it's a thought that really has a lot of relevance to our time as we deal with a Constitution that has not fully adapted to our times, and you deal with Supreme Court justices who go by this way of originalism, which is really cherry picking to find what they want, the agenda, that far right agenda. So anyway, I've covered a lot of ground in the film, what I was talking about. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Michael. So let's bring Dr. Marty K. Casey into the conversation. Dr. Marty K. Casey is the founder of Ungun Institute, which is focused on disarming trauma in individuals and to heal from collective trauma events which plague communities. Part of the White House Task Force on Gun Violence, she is also an extraordinary singer, and gifted actress, which we heard a little bit of a sample of earlier. And she's also a writer, producer, and director. So welcome to the broadcast, Dr. Marty K. Casey.
Wow, thank you, Rick. I actually just witnessed a history lesson from Michael. Amazing.
Right.
to be here, and I don't think you could have set this up any better. Even having me open up with the poem from Langston Hughes, takes us out of slavery, that Michael just so brilliantly brought it home as to the the time periods of what's been happening in the past and where we are right now, leading us to where we are in this moment. And I
Yes,
think this is almost like a relay race, and he just passed me the baton. I got to
exactly.
pick it up and take us a little bit further to where we are right now, because
Exactly.
I am truly someone that's boots on the ground, working in the now, and I think that I can lend a voice to speak to that. So thank you.
Yes, and my impression is that you've been on a mission kind of to heal trauma in individuals and in communities, especially ones devastated by gun violence, such as in Ferguson with the police killing of Michael Brown. And I know you were working hard to connect with people around the country with peace kits and other ways to motivate people to participate in improving our democracy. Also, you launched Black Sun Day, which is Sun, SON, Black Sun Day. Maybe you want to talk about that a little bit. And so, Dr. Marty, what is your assessment of freedom and democracy in the US? And please tell us about your extraordinary work to serve our society.
Sure. Wow. Again, I'm still taking in all of the information that I just heard personally, because it enlightens and makes a lot of sense as to why we are in the climate that we're in right now. I want to also do a quick little quote of one of my favorites of Dr. Martin Luther King. Quote, "Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed," end quote, Dr. King. Um, if freedom is not voluntary given, it's not just given to us. No one's going to just say, "Hey, do you want some freedom?" That tells me right there we got some work to do. And when I listen to the words of it being demanded, I think that's where we kind of get into the violence part of it, because and I am not by any means undoing the words that was written by this scholar, Dr. King. But I want to just kind of bring it into to format here, that Dr. King, during a time in the 60s, he understood exactly what was happening in that climate, and he understood that nothing was going to ever be given. We had to a certain extent, demand it. And then I believe that once we received what we thought was freedom, we got a little laxed, and we began to just think that everybody was winning, and we kind of turned our backs a little bit. And then upon doing that, we turn around and we realize that we was never we was given an empty bag. Inside of that bag, when you run off with it and you think your freedom's in there, it really wasn't. There's still a lot of hidden racism, a lot of police brutality, just a lot of things. And I'm going to be kind of just speaking to the world that I live in today, and the individuals that I'm serving. I we heard of the PPP, and that stands for the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP loans. Well, when I think of PPP, I think of politicians' power and paychecks. I've been saying PPP for a long time before they came up with PPP loans, and because politicians' power and paychecks tells me that when those three things are involved, that there's going to be some oppressed people. There's going to be some people left out. There's going to be some things that are going to be paid for underhandedly, under the table, and in ways that if we don't, in the collective, come together in the spirit of making sure that everyone is unified and everyone is inclusive, then we will continue to go to war with one another, because again, there is a hidden agenda in these systems that have been built that Michael so again eloquently spoken about prior. So I don't have to go over those things, but I do want to add to, when I think of we, I think of win every time. We stands for win every time. And when I think of me, I think of miss every time. We miss an opportunity to win when we are in the me spirit versus being in the we spirit. I want to win. And so therefore, I had to create systems and ways of communicating and doing things to be on a winning team. Because when I walk into a room as a short African-American, middle-aged Black woman, I'm not always clear on where my seat is at the table. I may not even have a seat at the table. Sometimes I got to bring my own folding chair. So I had to learn how to create these things. And I did this through the arts, and infusing the arts in Ungun Institute and our method has allowed me to not be in the spirit of demanding or the spirit of what's the word I'm looking for? Well, being in the spirit of being demanding about something, but knowing that it's due. See, a demand and what's due to you is two different things. I see, if it's in the contract, it's due to me. It's due to me. But when I go into a room demanding something and we don't have it written in the contract, then that kind of it invites war to come in. And so when I look at the work that we do at Ungun Institute, the one thing we want to do is disarm the trauma. We have to get to a place where we can communicate better, where I can hear you and you can hear me, because I'm not here for demands, but I'm here for what's due to me. And there's a difference. So my attitude is it comes across a little bit differently. And I think that that's one of the things that we really need to look at, how we're communicating with one another. I remember Michelle Obama speaking a few years ago, when they go low, we go high. And that worked for a while until they never ever stopped going low. And it just seemed like we were just getting beat up in these high places, and we're just, yeah, I mean, like they're just gut punching us. And it's like, well, what do you do here? So this is where it is okay to speak up for yourself and to say that this is what's due. And we're holding here. We're not budging. We're not moving. We're standing together. We're arm in arm. We're coming in like an army too, but we're an army of peace. We're not an army of war. But there is power in numbers. And when we stand together and we gather those that are in a peace mindset, we can be just as strong, get anything that's due to us as anyone else. And that is what we're teaching through Ungun Institute. So with that being said, I looked at the other young lady, Jasmine, I'm sorry, I can't think of her last name right now. Congresswoman Jasmine. She's an amazing young lady who's a civil rights attorney. And there were some words exchanged between her and another congresswoman about a month ago, and it went viral. And I'm listening, but she never used one curse word. Not one curse word, but she spoke her truth, and she stood strong on what she believed in, and she got all of our attention, to the point that they allowed her to speak at the convention this week. Her voice was heard. Why? Not because she went as low as the other person, but she spoke to what was due to her, and that was respect. We are all due respect. We are all due opportunity. We are all due housing. We are all due of being able to put food on our table and to keep our families safe. These are things we're due. These aren't demands, but they are putting us in positions to where they make us feel like we have to fight for it. I'm not fighting for what's due to me. Because the moment that I have to fight for it, that's me telling someone else that they have more rights than me, and they do not. I am human and I'm breathing in the same air and I have the same opportunities and I'm going places and I'm doing things just like anyone else. And who's going to stop me? I'm do that. And that is what I want to continue to teach to those, especially our grandchildren and their children that's coming up behind us. We have to show them another way. And because of that, this work that we do at Ungun Institute, it has to, as Michael spoke about these 18 to 34-year-olds being willing to protest and mobilize and come together because they didn't see enough strength of us, those before them, standing arm to arm. And why? Because we entered into that me attitude. I got mine. You better get yours. I got my education. Where'd you go to school? And I live here. What's your zip code? We separated and divided amongst ourselves. But these young people understand no matter who you are, where you are, and what you're trying to do, if we do it together, we can succeed. They can't take us all down at once. And so I just believe that right now, where we are in a nation, we can learn from, I'm looking at it from the babies. What the babies coming into the world, they even cry differently. If you really pay attention to the babies and the little bitty toddlers, they're doing things so differently. It's almost like they're born with electronics in their hands and they already know the answers. And we can learn from them. It used to be we were the wise ones passing wisdom down, but I believe we need to reach down and pull wisdom up. We can learn to do something different. And when we do that, we're going to create something different. And that's the beauty of being human. Humanity hasn't changed. We're still the same. We still, our senses is to hear, taste, touch, smell, see. Our senses are still the same. We're still human. But because we after that PPP, politicians, power, and paychecks, we're treating each other differently. So if you want to know what's going on with the world and why we are at war, war starts with self. And then from that, it enters into families, and from families into communities, and then into the world. So if we want to stop war in the world, we got to go back to the basics and stop war in self. I love you just because you're you. And I hope you love me because I'm me. And me and you together make a we. And until we connect arm in arm again, and we move in the right spirit of the mentality of win every time, I believe that we will continue to meet here in these spaces talking about it. But we can no longer afford to talk. We got to do.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. And can I just also ask you about some of the things that you've been doing recently? Like you mentioned, it's kind of like a mantra for people. Stop, breathe, and think. There you go. Aha. Very good. Perfect.
Also, that's a little billboard there. That's a replica of the big billboards that we have
Wow.
here in our city. 24 billboards went up for a safe summer campaign last year, and they've been up for over a year. And oh my gosh, the response and the result we've gotten from this has been tremendous because it is a peace response. Stop, take a breath, just breathe, just keep breathing. Think, stop, breathe, think. If you take a pause for the cause, I promise you, you will disarm the trauma and the drama that's happening in that moment in your life. You'll keep yourself safe and you'll keep others around you safe. I remember growing up and they said that if ever your body caught on fire, to just simply stop, drop, and roll. And I thank goodness I've never had to do that, but I never forgot what I was supposed to do if that happened. But no one ever taught us what to do when it feels like your brain is on fire and you're angry and your anxiety is high and you're just ready to react. No one taught us what to do to put that fire out in your mind. And that is simply to just stop, breathe, think. If you take a pause to do that, you will not only keep yourself safe, but you'll keep others around you safe. And that's what it's all about. Again, is starting with the self, family, community, in that order. We can't show up and be world leaders, community leaders, and we haven't even helped our own families. And we haven't, how can we show up and be a spokesperson in our family and we're out of order? Start with self. And that is not a selfish thing to do. That is a selfless thing to do. And our curriculum, Stop, Breathe, and Think. We're teaching workshops all over the world. We've been in Spain. We're on our way to Japan. We're working in schools with businesses, with individuals on Zoom, in person, you name it. Whatever works well for you, we can come and make it happen. But we're really turning the mindset around. It's the mind, body, and spirit. And because again, that's what the human is made out of. We have to speak to humanity in order to stop some of the violent actions that's happening.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Marty. And let's have a little roundtable discussion for a few minutes. And Jana, please join in. And do you have anything you wanted to add to the conversation? And then can throw it open to everybody if you have any comments about anything that anyone has said up to this point. So,
Well,
Jana.
hi. I really appreciated everything that has been said. It's really amazing. And I too liked the history lesson. um, for me, and the way I raised my kids, and it's the way I was raised, it's to be a citizen of your community and of the world. And that means getting involved and working for good things. And so I still do that. I still join a lot of organizations and sign petitions and share petitions and pay attention. I like to be informed and be aware of those falsities and myths, and don't spend a lot of time talking to negative people. You're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to change your mind. um, talk to the people in your community. We were talking about it this morning. Find your tribes, and and become allies and do good work. And also, especially about democracy, um, uh, one must vote. And because if one doesn't vote because, oh, I don't like him or I don't like her or whatever, then you're giving the other side a chance, and we just can't let that happen. So some groups that I've joined that I think are really doing a good job are just some groups around in Ohio, like Common Cause, and being aware of what's going on in the legislatures. You can, you know, that's for your state. And my state, I think, is really important. And there are other national organizations like Move to Amend. And when you're talking about the Constitution, seeing what parts of the Constitution really aren't right for the current day. And then also, as a woman, supporting women's groups. And one that I really liked joining, and I don't know, it's not in every state, but Michael, I wonder if you've heard of it. It's called Red Wine and Blue, and it's getting suburban women everywhere. But it's like modern day suffragettes, get out of your house, vote. Don't just say, oh, I can't be involved. I don't know what's going on or anything. Get involved and be an active member of your community and your world. So that's what I say.
All right. Well, thank you, Jana. And Michael and Dr. Marty, any other reactions to anything anybody has said?
Well, first I'll add on with what Jana's talking about because it's true. A lot of people in the U.S. are of voting age are cynical about the process. The United States has one of the lowest voter turnout rates of any country. The opposite is something like Australia, where voting is compulsory. But here, people feel like it's all as Dr. Marty said, PPP. It's just politicians are on the take and just the paycheck and they got the power. But yeah, we definitely can't give in to the cynicism because we have to exercise our right to vote and whatever else we have to exercise to live in the democracy that we all envision. And also want to bring up Dr. Marty brought her work is with trauma, and there's a lot of traumatized people in the United States who need help, who need community. That's another part of that whole social cohesion, the common good, the common bonds. Community can help heal trauma. And there's a lot of people, whether gun violence, racialized violence, or just the trauma of racialization, or just so many ways, not getting help, just feeling alone. And we have also an epidemic of loneliness in this country. We have the deaths of despair. So there's so many different things about healing. Democracy is going to take policy changes, legislative changes, people voting, and also a certain level of healing the trauma of coming together. One of the persons I interviewed for my film talked about what was done in South Africa. Oh no, it was you, Rick. Sorry, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which I guess you've probably talked about often. But yeah, how do we heal what is going on in this country? And first, we have to accept that there have been traumas, there have been things inflicted on people. So anyway,
Yeah.
I would like to add that around voting, that is also trauma for the African American community. There's still a lot of trauma surrounded around voting, but we cannot allow that to stop us. We can't change what happened. We can only change how we feel about it. And the best way to get out in front of that is when you know that you still have some feelings of suppression. You still remembering some of those horrible experiences and situations or what have you. That what can you do now to make sure that that doesn't happen? So maybe that is going to the voting polls with a friend, with a trusted friend, or doing an absentee vote, or making it almost like an outing, like, okay, the whole family, we're going to go in the car, we're going to have some snacks, and we're going to pray, and I'm going to go in and come out, and we're going to go somewhere, we're going to talk about it, or what have you. So sometimes you have to create what it is that you need in order to avoid some of that hurt and pain, especially when you can be triggered by it. It's important to do so. But voting is truly a powerful tool that we have, and it's a right, and we need to exercise that right as much as we possibly can.
So thank you, Dr. Marty. I was wondering if you could address something that came up as you were talking about people who are due something, like due housing or due food, just the stuff that everybody would expect, the basics that. So I would call that, and a lot of people might call that a social contract, you know, And the question is, can we get some kind of agreement on that social contract? I think that's the problem, because uh, and maybe Michael, this is what you're talking about with some of those Nordic countries. They have a social contract that says, okay, everybody has going to get the basics, but we don't have that in the United States, and
No,
therefore that's where the conflict comes in, right? Right, Dr. Martin?
sure. Well, one of the things that you're alluding to, and I would love to speak to that, going back to the PPP again, when we're talking about the politicians' power and paychecks. What I am seeing through our government, let's say when the pandemic hit, there was a lot of funding that came down, and there was big organizations within different states that was making sure that there was boxes and boxes of food being passed out or what have you, which was great because that, I mean, that was very helpful to the economy and to the families that needed, that couldn't get to it. But then let's say it turned into, now we have funding for so you can get the gun locks or what have you. Then that same organization now, instead of giving out food, now they're the gun lock experts. And then it turns into something else. It's like they're following the money. And because they have the structure, if you will, to always be able to check every box and get the big funding before smaller organizations can step up to help, they're monopolizing and taking over, and then it's not reaching everyone. You keep changing your structure of who you are and what you say that you do. And so then when someone's looking for something, we thought it was you, you're no longer doing that, you're doing this. And then now those people are dropping through the cracks again. So I think to a certain extent, yes, we do need to make sure that we have everybody doing something, but we also don't need to have them switching jobs in the midst of whatever it is they're deciding to do, but they're chasing the money. And there has to be something that we put in place in the structure that doesn't allow these big corporations and organizations, especially 501c3, that are getting grant money, government grant money, to do that, because I think it's very, very unfair. I get more calls being a very small business, if you will. We're a small business doing big people business. We're helping to save lives, and there's other organizations doing great work on that level. However, I have absolutely not even 1% in terms of funding backing me in comparison to those organizations that get this funding. But then when someone is losing their home, or someone's been abused, or gun violence has happened, we're the very first company that they call. We're the first ones that they call. They call Ungun Institute. I can read text messages, and upon messages every day I get a message saying there's a young lady that's just been abused, and she's homeless with 3 children, has no place to go. Dr. Marty, can you help with any housing? We've given away 2 cars, Rick. We've done big things from a very small wallet. But imagine if we were tapped into the government, where we had special funding funneling into us to be able to continue to do this work, because we can show measurement that this is the impact of what we've been able to do. But they check it off on paper, and it looks like impact, but it really isn't.
Wow, I hear that. Michael, any thoughts?
Well, I'm glad you brought up, Rick, what Dr. Marty had talked about earlier about like having to fight to get all these basic needs, part of the social contract, which, as I talked about other countries, these social democracies, it's normal. And here we got to demand our rights. I liked what before Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, now vice presidential nominee, was named nominee, when he was on one of the interview shows, and they brought up, oh, you gave out free, Minnesota has free lunches and breakfast for school kids. And he said, it's really funny, but true. He said, oh yeah, I'm a monster that these kids are eating. And it's like, those are basic needs. And the thing that they did in Minnesota, they made it universal. They didn't condition it on those who have less income, because there's a stigma about those with less income who would have gotten. All these things should be universal. All these things that are met. There's an idea that's been floated around. It's called baby bonds or universal minimum inheritance, that everybody at birth is allotted a certain amount of money. They don't get it able to touch it until age 20, 25. And the French economist Thomas Piketty has put it at $150,000. I don't know if the people advocating baby bonds the same thing, but it's how do we create an economy that works for everyone? We don't condition, as Dr. Marty's saying, how do we, with her organization, we want to help everyone. We need the resources, but there shouldn't be the conditioning. Oh, you do this, you do that. It should be for everyone. When the banks were getting all their after the financial crash that they caused, we're getting all the bailouts, and the Federal Reserve started making money available to all the banks under the guise of quantitative easing. The idea got put forth, well, why isn't there a quantitative easing for the people? Why are banks being bailed out? Why aren't people getting a universal basic income or a baby bond, or organizations like Dr. Marty getting what people need? And that's and that goes to another thing about social democracy. When I was talking, I said how in the 1930s, Roosevelt's administration, the New Deal, put more money into the government, put more money into the people. I think it was something like close to 40 or 50% of GDP went into government programs. And we need the same thing again, more resources. And the sad thing is, every time ideas get floated to help people, you hear the Republicans, that's socialism. That's why Tim Walz made that joke, I'm a monster. And that's where the Republican, Trump, and all those other are calling Harris, Walz communist, socialist, all the Democrats, because they want to help people. That's basic nature, to help people. That's, what the gist of what you get at, Rick, with we consciousness. How do we help people? Kindness.
Michael, I'm sorry, I have to add to this because this is a thought that has been in my head and I never really spoke it out loud. This is the first place I'm even going to share this with anybody.
Mhm.
I've always said, why don't we, instead of having when you're born and you start working at 16 and you're building up what you have for retirement, why don't we get a certain amount of money when a baby is born and it's the spin down? And so you're using it as you need it. And then it makes you work harder to continue to put that money back in it so that by the time you are in retirement, you are accustomed to a certain way of life. You don't mind replenishing. But if you are born in a deficit, do you know how hard it is to get out of a hole? Do you know how hard it is? It's easier for me to build a top to put over the hole so I don't fall in it than it is for me to try to climb my way out of a hole. And I've always often wondered, and I'm not the sharpest, see, I can't even think of the sharpest pencil in the box.
Tool in the shed, I think it's called.
I'm not the sharpest pencil in the box or the cutest Crayola, but the bottom line is I still color, right? I'm broken, but I still color. And I'm like, why can't we help people in the beginning so that it doesn't become such a need in the end? In the end, it's over. End means over. We need to get it in the beginning, in the birth of. Thank
That
you,
makes
Michael.
sense.
Yeah, it's like common sense.
You
And
would
why can't women have some sort of standing in the Social Security system for staying home to raise citizens of the world?
Of
And
course. That's
that's
right.
ridiculous.
That's basic. It's basic, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And I am gonna say this because I'm all about women's rights. Don't get me started on that. But I will have to say, in the last 15, 20 years, I've seen men step up and do the same thing because women, we have been so traumatized for so many years. that so some of us have bottomed out, and men have had to step up to raise their children and become fathers in the home and stay home fathers. They have had to do, there's been a reverse in some cases of situations. So, but when I think about, just again, it's about humanity. If we did that, if we flip the script, you know, I look at things almost like a funnel, and this top funnel is open. This is where it's wide, and then it comes down here, and you got your clog part. Well, up here, up top is where everybody has everything, all the resources, all the money, opportunity. And by the time it gets here to the clog part, those who are down here at the bottom, there's nothing left. There's crumbs. And so we're fighting, we're killing each other for the crumbs. We got to learn to flip that funnel. And then that clog part, go ahead and stuff all the opportunity, the money and everything in first, and then let it trickle down this way. And it will come down faster because you got a wider span of it coming. You know what I'm saying? So he gets here, it gets clogged. It's not moving fast. But if we flip that funnel, we can make some changes, and we can do that. We can do that right away. And I'll tell you, I'm gonna give you a quick example. And I don't want anybody to beat me up on this recording here, but this is a quick example as we're talking about women's rights, and everybody's so up in arms about women having the rights to have an abortion or not have an abortion. Well, I'm gonna tell you this: you probably wouldn't even have a woman having an abortion and be happy to have a child if, in fact, that child was receiving $150,000 from the time that the child was born, and she wouldn't have to worry about how she's going to feed that child, how that child's going to get an education, how that
Exactly.
child's going to have clothes and shoes
That's
on their
right.
feet. I promise you, the whole mentality of that woman would change if money was not the issue.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Mhm.
You got it. So
Mhm.
on that note, I want to thank everybody for participating in this. And Jana, do you want to do a little closing, and then I'll do my thing, and we'll
You'll do
bring it
your
all
thing?
together.
All right, okay. Well, thank you all so much for what you are all doing in the world. This has really been an amazing discussion. And thank you, all of you, for watching this, for being a part of the 20th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity. Please go to we.net to get involved and even make a contribution if you feel like it. We would certainly accept that. I and we would be so happy and appreciative. Rick?
Thank you. Well, this has been a really, I think, important conversation for with us and with the audience that we have. Thank you for being part of the 11 Days of Global Unity 20th Anniversary Summit. And I'm some people know this. This is like a W, right? It's a W. So and it's a W meaning we. So let's go from being a me society, which is like a me, an M. So let's go from being a me society to a we society, and that's why we launched we.net. So together we can create a world that works for all.
Amen.
All right. So thank you so much, and bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.